It was the slide seen round the world, round after round. All eyes were on Shedeur Sanders, whose name was never called until the 5th round of the NFL draft Saturday, when the Cleveland Browns made Sanders the second quarterback they'd draft over the weekend. The Browns traded up with the Seattle Seahawks to select Sanders with the 144th overall pick.
I just say the biggest thing for us, we live by our board. We felt like he was a good, solid prospect at the most important position. We felt like it got to a point where he was probably mispriced, relative to the draft. Really the acquisition cost was pretty light, and it's a guy that we think can outproduce his draft slot. So I wouldn't say it's any more than that. Obviously Shedeur has kind of grown up in the spotlight. But our expectation is for him to come in here and work and compete. Nothing's been promised. Nothing will be given. So I may hesitate to characterize it as a blockbuster. That's not necessarily how we thought of the transaction. But we are excited to work with him.
Okay, that was Browns GM Andrew Berry. Lewis, good morning. Damien, good morning. All right, gentlemen, I sat on this set Friday, all of us, right, as the first round went. And I tried to look at the positive. Hey, blessing in disguise. Maybe he'll be in a better situation. None of us thought he was going to slide to the 5th round. Lewis, what happened, and is this fair to Shedeur?
Well, Molly, I don't think, look, the draft isn't about fairness. That's really not what it's about. And I think the reason why I say that is because I've said numerous different times, this whole process is very subjective, all right? It's very opinionated. There's human beings who are trying to assess players and their fit relative to the NFL and relative to their own, individual franchises. And that's an ongoing year-long process, multi-year long process, because scouts, even though we're primarily concentrating on Shedeur, this year and maybe even last year, it's one of those things where they're compiling a bunch of information both on the field and off the field for a number of different months. And then as it gets down to the wire, there's a lot of things that come into it that really don't have to do with your play on the football field, in particular quarterback. And there's a lot of other people that come into the whole thing when you're talking about then trying to set your final board. I think with Shedeur, look, I've said this numerous different times. This was not a on-the-field thing for me, because you are not going to ever tell me that Shedeur Sanders was worthy of a 5th-round selection based strictly off of what he did on the football field. What this came down to is somewhere in the off-the-field process, okay, when you're trying to assess someone's personal and football character and whether or not they feel as though it warrants a certain level or a certain price to be paid in order to acquire his services, people didn't feel that way. People just did not feel that way. As I said on Sunday or on Saturday to Mel Kiper, the draft is spoken. Whether we like it or not, the draft spoke. And somewhere along the line, people were not comfortable with the risk that would be associated with taking him in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. That doesn't mean I agree with it. That doesn't mean that anybody agrees with it. That just means that that's what the teams felt. So now for him, he's going to have to go back and look at that process and say, hey, look, what was it during that process that somehow made these people, meaning the 32 teams, feel as though I wasn't worthy of being picked much higher than I was? Pay attention to those things. Make the kind of course corrections that he needs to, and now compete his rear end off to win the job, which he is fully capable of doing in Cleveland.
I think the NFL sent the message. And the message that was sent was, you are not that guy. Or, as people like to say, you are not him. Because what I've seen, and what many folks have seen year after year after year, if you have that type of talent, regardless of off the field, interviews, guess what? You're going to get picked high, because the NFL teams are in the winning business. They're not in the business of allowing elite talent to just continue to fall. It just doesn't happen that way. Do we see guys slip some? Absolutely. We've seen guys have egregious things in their background where they might slip, but ultimately the NFL is in a talent acquisition business. If they feel like a guy can help us win right now, they're not going to sit there and pass over a guy time after time after time. And so when you talk about Shedeur Sanders, that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is, okay, if this guy's coming in and he's not that guy, if he's going to be maybe a backup, backup quarterbacks are obscure. They're not guys that's in the forefront. And so if you're a team, do you want a guy that's going to come in with all the celebrity, everything that comes with Shedeur Sanders? You have to think that's part of a big part of the reason why a guy like Shedeur Sanders can tumble all the way to the 5th round. This is the league speaking. This is not, we can sit here and pontificate about Shedeur Sanders and why we thought that he should have been drafted higher. But ultimately, at the end of the day, 32 teams out there sent a message that said, you know what? You're just not him.
Saying what I'm about to say in a roundabout way. Louis Riddick, I'm going to be straight up and down with you because you know how much I revere you. I completely disagree with you with what you're saying, and I'm disappointed in what you didn't say. A lot of this was about primetime Deion Sanders. You can say whatever you want to the audience out there, to these idiotic trolls all over social media talking about, Shedeur Sanders wasn't that great or whatever. There is no one, I repeat, no one that looked at Shedeur Sanders and even had him less than the 3rd best quarterback in the draft. This is a quarterback-driven league. This guy was considered one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the draft, and 143 picks came and went before you heard his name. Don't talk to me about football. I don't want to hear a damn thing about football. This ain't about football. This is about something else. And I said that even though it's different, I brought up the name Colin Kaepernick. And why? I didn't sit up there and throw a pity party for Colin Kaepernick. I knew his career in the NFL was over the minute that the NFL organized that workout for him at the Atlanta Falcons practice facility, which was led by Jay-Z and those cats and Roger Goodell and what have you, and he elected not to show up and instead tried to have the workout an hour and 20 minutes away, and he going to notify them 2 to 3 hours before the workout. I said he is done. And I have no sympathy because, damn it, they tried to make it happen because the league had to do it because the owners didn't want to. It's an accident that no owner in the National Football League wanted to touch him. We can use the word collusion. It ain't necessary. They think alike in a lot of different situations. They don't have to collude with one another. There's a universal understanding that this is our league, and we want to do what we want to do the way that we want to do it. And we'll be damned if anybody's going to tell us what to do because guess what? We running the show, and people going to come. They're going to flock to the stadium. They're going to have their tailgate parties. We going to win in the ratings. We going to make damn near $250 million apiece as an owner. Ain't a damn thing anybody's going to do about it. We understood that years ago. But suddenly we going to engage in collective amnesia here. Hold on, Molly, because this is very important. Primetime Deion Sanders, hands are not clean in this. Shedeur Sanders, hands are not clean on this. If you go into an interview and people thinking that you brash and arrogant and what have you, and they think that they're going to have a problem working with you, that's partially on you. Primetime Deion Sanders going out publicly and stating on the record, there's a couple of teams we might not want to win. And he ain't going there if we going to get him, if they're going to select him. And he's on Tamron Hall's show, and she's like, what if your son don't listen? He said, who? What? Like, that ain't going to happen. You look at NFL teams, along with the specter of people potentially calling for him to be the next coach, you can understand the reticence. But for 143
Stephen A.,
picks.
hold that thought, because you brought up 3 points, and I want Louis to respond. The first point is the football aspect of him being the 3rd quarterback on everyone. Then there's the Deion aspect, and then there's the Shedeur aspect. So let's tackle them one by one. First, Louis, can you respond to Stephen A.'s sentiment about that he was the 3rd best quarterback on everybody's draft board?
At least.
And this didn't have anything to do with play?
If not top 2.
Look, like I said, evaluating players is highly subjective. Do I believe that he was okay? Let's just put it this way. Do I believe that he was worse than Dylan Gabriel, who I love? I love Dylan Gabriel as a person. Watched him live as a player multiple times. No, he's better than Dylan Gabriel.
That's right.
He's a better football player than Dylan Gabriel. Okay, as simple as that. What I wanted to say though is this, Stephen, I've said multiple times. Of course, Deion's specter, Deion's aura, Deion's presence has something to do with this. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the process that has nothing to do with on the football field. When teams are evaluating Shedeur from January, February, March, April, all of that comes along with him, his, the people who are with him, the people who are going to be his inner circle. How's he going to be as far as how's he going to be advised? What's all the people who play a prominent role in his life and that are advising him, directing him, influencing him. Of course, teams evaluate all of that. Some people are going to be very, very influenced and very intimidated by the magnitude of Deion Sanders. Of course they are. Of course they are. What I said, though, was this. When you're going through this process, you have to do a certain amount of making sure that you convince the 32 different teams that they're going to get something that does nothing but benefit their organization on and off the field. And you have to eliminate as many questions as you can, so then it really just becomes about your play on the field. Because his play on the field warranted him being picked much higher than he was picked. But this was not about that. This was about everything else. I know it was about everything else because there was no other reason for him to fall. This was about the process, to me, from January up until the day that the draft happened, that somewhere along the line teams got uncomfortable with it.
I feel like
it's so layered. It's so layered.
Well, but let's get into the layers.
But you'll never get a straight answer about it.
We're dancing around it. So why is Deion to blame? Or how could Shedeur have been better in the interviews? Like, let's get to what really went down.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Lewis. Go ahead.
No, I'll say this. Look, I wasn't in the interviews. I wasn't in the interview at the Combine. I wasn't at his, in his interviews that he had with teams in private workouts. The question, that question needs to be directed to the people who were interviewing him. It wasn't about his preparation, like supposedly with the New York Giants and Brian Daboll. Why did you confront him? What was the issue? How was he not prepared? What does that exactly mean to you? What does that mean? There's a lot of things that are kind of like I said, there's a lot of information that only the teams can give you because they're the ones who passed on him. It wasn't me that passed on him. I would have taken the guy given what I know about him.
All right, let's get everyone else in here.
Listen, I think, first of all, Stephen A., there's a word you use collusion. I think we got to be very careful with the word collusion because I don't think, to me, the talent plays a big role in this whole situation. Because even when you brought up Colin Kaepernick, if Colin Kaepernick was the Colin Kaepernick from, 4 or 5 years prior, he wouldn't have been in that situation. I think this about Shedeur Sanders. If Shedeur Sanders had the talent of Caleb Williams, will we even be having this discussion right here and right now? Hell no. If Shedeur Sanders had Caleb Williams' talent, regardless of how everything is played out, the discussions we're having about Deion Sanders and all of that, he would have still been the number one pick because ultimately teams value talent over everything. Teams are in the winning business.
Hold on,
they are in the winning business.
Well, we got to hear from Stephen A. Go ahead, Stephen A.
I'm looking at it in the reverse, Woody. I'm not questioning if he were Caleb Williams, would this have happened? I know better. I'm not questioning if this is Jaden Daniels, it would have happened. I know better. What I'm saying is, rather than ask that question about the inordinate amount of talent those guys have, how about asking the question, it's deeper than me that it's in the 5th round? Because he's not a 5th round. That is a precipitous drop. And so when you remember when I said collusion, I said they don't have to collude. It's a universal understanding. They understand one another. They don't have to conspire with one another. They know how they think. It's about control. It's their product. And if Deion Sanders, and again, I'm not blaming him for it. I'm talking about the kind of excuses, the kind of mentality, and I'm going to prove it to you in 1 second. In terms of him saying what he said and them wanting to send a message, nah, we ain't having that. This is our league. Do you remember when the owners with the TV deal? Remember during the whole Colin Kaepernick situation where it reached the point where the owners, Lewis and Dame, got like $246 million apiece. Y'all remember that? For the TV rights deal? Do you remember the news that they were complaining about the $5 million that they missed out on per team, and they blamed Colin Kaepernick for that? Remember that?
Yeah.
They said, they got a check, Molly, for $246 million apiece. And were complaining privately about the $5 million they missed out on. This is how they think. And so to me, him falling to the fifth round, it's like you're sending a message collectively as a body.
A message
Yo,
to
we don't
who?
want this like that.
A message to who? To Shedeur, to Deion? And you said, you know what Deion said. What are you alluding to?
Well,
I don't know which part you're talking about.
I said earlier, Molly, when Deion said, if certain teams we don't want my son at, and we ain't gonna let him go there. Like, who the hell you think you are?
So, like, he overplayed his hand by saying that. Got it.
Okay, hold on. So yeah. I want to ask a question to Lewis.
Sure.
Okay, and Lewis knows this. Okay, everything that comes with Shedeur Sanders, and we know what that is.
Yeah.
Don't you think that a lot of teams out there view that as a distraction as it relates to where this young man was drafted?
Yes.
The fact that he's starting out as a backup quarterback, and that played a role in this whole situation.
There's no question. Look, we know this. This axiom holds true in the NFL, and it's held true in the NFL from the time I was a kid, and it'll hold true in the NFL long after I'm gone. The greater the talent, the greater the tolerance. Okay?
Right.
That holds true, and that is holding true in this situation. Now, does that mean he's a fifth-round talent? Absolutely not. So is there a subjective component to this, a personal component to this, a message-sending component to this as to why he fell to the fifth round?
That's all I'm saying.
You are being naive to think that there isn't. You're being naive to think that there isn't. Because there is. Because personal feelings come into this. I've been in enough draft meetings. I've had enough conversations with scouts. Hell, I was a scout. Personal feelings come into it. I don't like this guy, he's dropping. I don't like that guy, he's dropping. I like that guy, I'm pushing him up. They're human beings who are making these decisions, man. Yeah. This is not some automated process that is fail-safe and bulletproof. What you just saw here over the weekend has a lot to do with personal feelings and perception.
Okay, Lewis.